Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We've got quite a mix of material you've sent in this time.
Yeah, really fascinating stuff. A broad range.
Everything from, core legal ideas, philosophy of rights, consciousness even.
In governance, Montesquieu, Alan Watts.
Right, right. And then there's that meteor shower data, which is, well, unexpected.
Definitely stands out. Throws a curveball in there.
So our plan really is to sift through all this, try and find some surprising connections maybe.
Yeah, the hidden conversations between these fields.
Give you a fresh angle, a deeper understanding, without getting totally bogged down. Let's see what we can unearth.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
not just about the list, is it? It's about how these ideas talk to each other, what they tell us about. Well, everything, how we organize, how we see the world.
And our own place in it all. And joining us, we have our expert guide to help synthesize all this.
Happy to be here. It's quite the collection.
It is. So, just to map it out, we've got legal basics, jurisdiction, lawsuit, larceny, juror, different takes on rights, natural as resources, tied to social justice.
Then Montesquieu on governing structures, climate's influence.
Watts on self, reality, the mind's power, discipline. Thoughts on interpretation, Hamlet.
And that meteor data, of course. Plus, the psychology of obligation, institutional rules.
A lot to cover. Okay, where should we kick things off? Maybe the legal foundations.
Sounds good. Starting with the basics often helps frame things.
Right. So you included jurisdiction, the court's power to hear a case, and it's broken down like geographical, subject matter, personal.
Standard legal definitions.
But thinking broader, what does this concept of jurisdiction, these boundaries, suggest?
Well, it immediately brings up this idea of limits, doesn't it? Power isn't absolute. Geographical limits are obvious physical space.
Okay.
Subject matter limits ensure courts stay in their lane, criminal versus civil, and personal jurisdiction. Well, that asks who is subject to this power.
So it's about defining the scope of authority.
Exactly. And it's interesting. Maybe this reflects a broader human need to categorize, to draw lines. Perhaps even connects to what Watt says later about Maya, about classification creating our reality.
Interesting connection already. Okay, then we have lawsuit, just a case in court, and larceny.
Theft, yeah, with that distinction between grand and petit.
Based on, what was it, $1,000 value. Feels quite specific.
It does. And that specific monetary line, it really shows how legal systems have to translate abstract ideas like the wrongness of theft into concrete, measurable rules.
And the different penalties reflect societal priorities, I guess, what we value.
Precisely. It tells you something about the economic and social values embedded in the law, how different kinds of property or different amounts are weighted.
Then there's the juror and jury, a group finding facts, and this idea of an advisory jury came up too.
Yeah, where the judge isn't bound by their finding.
What's the significance of bringing in this group perspective, even if just advisory sometimes?
It speaks to the idea that justice isn't purely a technical, legal exercise, right? It benefits from, well, common sense, community values.
So collective wisdom.
Kind of, yeah. Incorporating a range of perspectives into the fact-finding process, even if the final legal decision rests elsewhere in some cases. It brings the community into the courtroom, in a way.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit into the concept of rights. We had Stanley Ben's view, first rights, as normative resources.
Tools, almost. Claims you possess.
And they can arise just from a promise being made. That feels practical, almost contractual.
Quite different from other views, yeah. Ben's focus is really on social interactions. If a promise creates a right, it means rights aren't necessarily inherent or fixed. They can be built, negotiated between people.
It's like a right to service because you paid for it.
Exactly. That's a normative resource you have because of that agreement, that promise.
Okay, so that contrasts pretty sharply with Donnelly's take on human rights as natural rights.
Take contrast, yeah.
The idea that we have rights just by virtue of being human, universal, inherent.
That's the core of it. Natural rights are seen as existing before any government or law. They're grounded in our basic humanity, something fundamental and inalienable.
And often used as a basis to critique laws, right?
Absolutely. If a law violates these fundamental rights, the natural rights perspective gives you a strong ethical standpoint to challenge it.
Then there's a third angle, linked to bites, that ties rights to social justice.
Right, discussed by Donnelly. This view sees human rights as what a just society ought to provide.
How does that fit between the other two? Is it a middle ground?
Sort of. It acknowledges our inherent human dignity, maybe like natural rights, but it stresses that the realization of rights depends on the structures of society. Rights become the concrete demands needed for social justice to exist within that cooperative system. It links the ideal to the practical structure.
So less abstract, more about what makes a society fair in practice.
Exactly. Brings in that crucial societal dimension.
Okay, let's turn to Montesquieu now. The spirit of laws. Big idea. Separation of power.
A classic. Legislative, executive, judiciary.
He split executive too, didn't he? Law of nations and civil law.
He did, yeah, detailing the different functions. But the main point was dividing power.
And why was that so critical for him?
It was all about preventing tyranny. Simple as that, really. Concentrate power, you risk oppression, separate it, give each branch checks on the others.
And you protect liberty. It's a structural safeguard.
Precisely. Accountability through structure.
Now, he also talks about climate and geography influencing laws and customs, even morals. That feels a bit dated.
Well, the direct link, like hot climates make people lazy. Yes, that's overly simplistic, maybe deterministic. We'd be skeptical today.
But is there an underlying insight worth keeping?
I think so. Montesquieu is pointing out that societies don't develop laws in a vacuum. The environment, climate, resources, geography shapes the challenges people face the way they live.
And so the rules and customs they develop naturally reflect that context.
Right. Think about laws related to water rights in arid regions versus regions with abundant water. The environment clearly plays a role in shaping those necessities and the resulting social structures.
Okay, that makes sense. He also looks at morality and manners interacting with law. That Samnite marriage custom example was interesting.
Yeah, where the young men were judged publicly and the most virtuous got first choice of a bride.
A deliberate attempt to use social practice to promote virtue. What does that tell us?
It shows societies can consciously try to shape character using customs, maybe even laws, to encourage certain behaviors they value. It raises big questions, of course, about whether law should play that role.
The relationship between law and shaping citizens' morals.
Exactly. Can you legislate virtue or foster it through social structures?
Montesquieu also mentions law and religion and gives some critiques, anecdotes about corruption, unfairness.
Yeah, the Mr. Law story, Constantine's Law.
So he wasn't just an abstract theorist. He saw the flaws in real systems.
Absolutely, and that's crucial. It's a reminder that even the best designed systems can be corrupted or fail. His critique underlines the need for constant vigilance, for ensuring fairness isn't just theoretical, but practical.
A call for critical thinking about the law itself.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Don't just accept the structures, question if they're truly serving justice.
Okay, let's pivot now. Alan Watts. Very different feel. A key idea is this illusion of separation.
Non-duality, questioning the separate I.
He uses the term Maya for how classification creates this illusion, the head and neck analogy.
Yeah. Do you have a head and a neck, or is it one continuous thing we just label differently?
Right, it makes you question those lines we draw. So what's the core takeaway?
Watts is fundamentally challenging that feeling we all have of being isolated individuals, separate from everything else. Maya suggests our useful habit of labeling creates artificial splits where maybe there's just oneness, interconnection.
Which leads directly to interdependence. Everything's connected.
The flip side of the illusion. If separation is unreal, then connection must be fundamental.
How does really accepting that change things, our actions, our sense of self?
Profoundly, potentially. If we're all interconnected, our actions aren't isolated, they ripple out. It shifts focus from pure individualism towards seeing ourselves as part of a larger web. Responsibility looks different then.
Watts also emphasizes the power of the mind, attracting desires, creating health, finding peace, managing thoughts.
Yeah, a strong emphasis on mental agency.
What's the significance there?
It's about recognizing that our consciousness isn't just a passive observer. Our thoughts, our focus, our beliefs, they actively shape our experience of reality, our well-being. It's empowering, suggesting we can take the reins internally.
He then discusses discipline and self-control, but not as negative things, right? More like paths to freedom.
Exactly. Built through small acts, like he says. Even a vow of silence is framed as strengthening will.
How does that reframe discipline? Usually sounds like restriction.
Watts flips it. True freedom isn't chaos, it's self-mastery. Discipline becomes the practice of aligning action with intention. It builds inner strength, autonomy. The vow of silence, for instance, is about gaining control over impulse, over chatter, which can be liberating.
Then visualization and mantras as tools.
Techniques to harness that mental power we just talked about.
How so?
Visualization lets you mentally rehearse, cultivate states of mind. Mantras provide focus, quiet the noise, maybe even influence subconscious patterns. They're ways to consciously direct the mind's energy.
And finally, from Watts, this idea of serving others for fulfillment.
Yes, linking inner peace with outer action.
How does that tie back to interdependence?
It's a direct expression of it, really. If we're all connected, then focusing on others' well-being isn't separate from our own. Contributing to the whole becomes a source of personal meaning and connection. Fulfillment found through engagement, not isolation.
Okay, let's connect Watts to the next bit. Our sources talk about broadening the definition of text.
Right? Not just books, but objects, events, institutions, even people. Seen as human creations with intent.
How does that shift our perspective? Treating, say, a building as a text.
It pushes us to look deeper. What was the intention? What cultural context shaped it? A building isn't just materials. It's saying something about function, values, aesthetics. A custom isn't just behavior. It reflects beliefs. It invites interpretation everywhere.
Which leads to interpretation and meaning, the importance of intent, context, using Hamlet's to be or not to be as an example.
Yeah, how the meaning shifts dramatically depending on how you stage it, what context you give it.
What does that highlight about meaning itself?
That it's not fixed in the text or the object or the event. Meaning is constructed. It's a dynamic process involving the text, the creator's intent, if we can know it, the context, and the interpreter, always in flux.
And this idea is applied to the self in Hamlet, too. The self as constructed, a function of discourse.
Echoing Watt's critique of the fixed ego, isn't it?
How do they align these two perspectives?
Both fundamentally challenge the idea of a solid, unchanging self. Watt sees the I as a mental construct, an illusion of separation. The Hamlet analysis sees identity as something shaped by language, by interactions, by the stories we tell. Fluid, relational, constructed through discourse.
So, no essential me waiting to be discovered, perhaps.
That seems to be the suggestion from both angles. More like something constantly being performed or created.
And then a practical note. Academic argumentation structure. Assertions, evidence, analysis.
Right. The tools for sharing interpretations effectively.
How does this fit with interpreting all these texts?
It's the framework, really.
Yeah.
If you want to argue that a building as a text represents certain values, you need to state that clearly. Assertion, point to specific features, evidence, and explain why those features support your claim analysis. It's how we make sense together, persuasive.
Right, structure for clarity. Okay, now for that meteor shower data.
The outlier. Radiant diameters, velocities, dates, positions.
Very different. Objective scientific data. How on earth does this connect?
Well, maybe the connection is the contrast. Everything else we've discussed, rights, laws, self, meaning, involves interpretation, social construction, human consciousness.
And this is just physics.
Pretty much. An external reality governed by measurable laws, seemingly indifferent to our philosophies or social agreements. It's a grounding point, perhaps.
A reminder that there's a physical universe operating alongside our constructed worlds.
Yeah, it highlights different kinds or levels of reality, the objective cosmos and the subjective or intersubjective human world. It invites us to hold both perspectives.
Almost humbling, like you said earlier, a reality beyond our arguments.
Exactly. While we're deep in concepts, this data points to something tangible, a material following its own rules, a different kind of truth. Empirical observation versus, say, philosophical reasoning.
Okay, let's shift again to the moral psychology of obligation, Tomasello's work.
Fascinating stuff on how our sense of ought develops.
The core idea being that obligation arises from collaborative we activities, not just imposed, but emerging from doing things together.
Right. He argues our earliest shared goals, working with others, create a sense of joint commitment. This we-ness fosters mutual expectations, responsibility towards partners. That's the seed of obligation.
And it has evolutionary roots, partner choice and control.
Yeah, the idea that we evolved to cooperate, choosing partners who are reciprocated, and crucially, developing ways to influence partners, like protesting if someone doesn't pull their weight.
So we actively enforce cooperation. Obligation isn't just internal.
It seems not solely internal. Social feedback, partner selection, protest, these are social mechanisms reinforcing those shared commitments and expectations. We shape each other's sense of obligation.
And we see early signs in children. Concern for partners, understanding joint commitments.
Yes, studies show young kids get fairness in collaborative tasks. They understand when a commitment's been made. It suggests this capacity for obligation is really fundamental developing early on.
Then this sense expands, right? From immediate partners to social norms and the cultural we.
Exactly, it scales up. We internalize the ways our group does things, the norms, the expectations. And we feel obligated to conform, partly to maintain that social cohesion.
The cultural we becomes a powerful source of odds.
Very powerful, shaping our sense of right and wrong within that group context.
But there's potential conflict
Yeah,
between these group norms and broader moral concerns.
definitely. What the group expects might clash with principles like fairness or welfare applied more universally. Think of pressures to show in-group loyalty, even if it harms an outsider.
How do we navigate that?
That's where individual conscience critical thinking comes in. We feel the pull of the group, but our broader moral sense might push back, creating ethical dilemmas. It's a constant tension.
Promises are a key example here, creating obligation.
A very direct way we create obligations between individuals, a mini social contract.
But there's cultural variation in how promises work.
The weight they carry, the exact understanding, how binding they feel, that can differ quite a bit across cultures, which shows that while the capacity might be universal, the expression is culturally shaped.
Interesting. And the idea that we feel obligated to trust strangers, even with zero acquaintance.
Yeah, that suggests a kind of default we perspective, doesn't it? A baseline assumption of cooperation or shared sociality, perhaps? An underlying trust in the broader social fabric, even with people we don't know.
Okay, finally, let's bring in Moreau's work on institutional role obligations.
Right. Obligations tied to our roles: parent, teacher, doctor, host.
And these go beyond just legal duties.
Oh, definitely. They're embedded in the established practices, the relationships within institutions like family, professions, community groups. These roles come loaded with expectations, moral weight.
Shaping what we feel we ought to do in that capacity.
Exactly. They form a big part of our moral landscape, guiding our actions within those specific contexts.
And cultures heavily influence these roles, both the content and the force.
Absolutely. What defines a good parent or a responsible leader varies enormously. Culture shapes the specific duties and how strongly we feel bound by them.
Roles can also create unequal relationships, putting obligations on those with authority.
Power often comes with heightened responsibility. If you're in charge within an institution, you typically incur extra obligations towards those under your care or supervision.
And these roles get reinforced by stories and symbols, like the waterkeeper or Matus harvester examples.
Yes, those cultural narratives give the roles meaning, status. The stories and symbols aren't just decoration. They help make the obligations feel real, normative, deeply significant. They embed the ought in a cultural context.
But a crucial caveat: not all institutionally imposed obligations are genuine moral obligations.
Very important point.
Yeah?
We have to retain a critical perspective. Just because an institution demands something doesn't make it right. We need to evaluate those demands against broader ethical standards. Is it fair? Is it just?
Okay, so let's try and weave some of these threads together now. Thinking back to the start, the legal definitions, Montesquieu's structures, how do they connect to these broader ideas of social organization, obligation?
Well, the legal system looks like one very formalized way society codifies certain obligations, right? It takes some of those social norms and expectations we discussed from Tomasello, Moreau, and gives them teeth, enforceability.
And Montesquieu's separation of powers.
That seems like an institutional design specifically aimed at managing the power and obligations of the state itself, limiting potential abuses that come with the authority role, ensuring accountability back to, well, the people or the law.
What about Watts? Can his ideas about reality being constructed give us a lens on social norms and roles?
I think so. If our sense of self is a construct and reality is shaped by perception, then social norms and institutional roles, which feel so solid, can also be seen as, well, shared constructs, products of agreement, language, culture.
Doesn't make them less powerful, though.
Not at all. But recognizing their constructed nature might make us more aware of how they're built, how they function, and maybe more willing to examine or even change them if they're not serving us well.
And the meteor shower data, that objective reality, how does it sit alongside socially constructed obligations?
It's the counterpoint, isn't it? It reminds us there's a universe operating by physical laws, independent of our agreements. It maybe helps delineate the boundaries. These are the obligations we create within our social world, distinct from the laws governing planets and stars. It provides perspective on the scope of our human systems.
Okay, and finally, connecting Tomasello and Moreau, development of obligation from childhood collaboration to established adult roles.
Yeah, it looks like a continuum. Tomasello shows the roots, how that basic sense of ought emerges from simple we interactions. Moreau then shows how society takes that fundamental capacity and embeds it within complex institutional structures, assigning specific duties based on roles, from innate potential to formalized social reality.
It's a journey from the playground to the workplace, almost.
In a sense, yes. From sharing toys to fulfilling professional responsibilities, the underlying psychology connects them.
So, learner, as we wrap up this deep dive, wow, we've covered a lot of ground. Legal basics, rights debates, governance structures, consciousness, the deep roots of obligation.
hmm Hopefully, seeing how these different pieces, law, philosophy, psychology, even astronomy, can actually speak to each other has been useful.
The big takeaway for me might be just how much our sense of rights, duties, even self isn't fixed. It's shaped by our interactions, our culture, the stories we tell.
Yeah, that idea that things like rights or obligations aren't just out there, but are actively constructed, negotiated, it's a powerful lens.
And maybe a surprising detail to hold on to is how something as simple as a promise could be seen as a basis for rights, or that baseline trust we sometimes show strangers hinting at a deep-seated social connection.
Small things pointing to big ideas.
Absolutely. Now, this has obviously just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore here.
Definitely. Delving deeper into any one of these areas, cross-cultural ethics, theories of rights, legal philosophy.
Consider how these ideas connect to your own experiences, your roles, your sense of responsibility, how you navigate disagreements about what's right or fair.
hmm How does understanding the constructed nature of things change how you approach them?
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. If our sense of obligation really is so tied to collaboration, to this feeling of we,
Yeah.
how can we intentionally build better, more inclusive, more equitable we's in our communities, our institutions, even globally? Especially now when things feel so complex and sometimes fragmented.
That's a big question, and maybe a good place to pause for now. Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, you've given us a really fascinating mix this time. We're looking at things like ID numbers, personal finance, the state of Maine, even some like language quirks, and this whole idea of being a lifelong learner.
Yeah, it's quite the collection. Our job really is to kind of weave these threads together, see what connections pop out, and find the most useful stuff for you.
Exactly. It's definitely a wide range of interests showing here. So should we just jump in? Maybe start with those identification numbers? Seems fundamental.
Sounds good. It's interesting how we structure things with unique IDs. Your sources mention quite a few, actually, like the state file number for vital records.
Oh, right. That's the one. Often our birth certificates, usually that XXXXXXXXX format.
Mm-hmm. And it apparently encodes things like an area code, the year it was registered, all managed by the state registrar.
Okay. And then for businesses, there's like a corporation number, 7 digits, or sometimes a longer 12-digit file number.
Yeah, you find those through the Secretary of State's office. It's basically how the state keeps track of businesses, gives them official standing.
It's all about that unique key, isn't it? Each number unlocks a specific record.
Precisely. The state file number gets you into vital stats. The business number confirms the company's existence for the state. It brings, order and accountability.
And the list just keeps going. There's the PID number, 8 digits from the Office of Protocol.
Right, often on consular ID cards for diplomatic interactions, that sort of thing.
Then you got the Department of Public Safety number that sounds more like law enforcement, criminal justice, maybe.
Seems likely, yeah. And then the everyday one for many people, the state ID number from the DMV.
Which is different again from the birth certificate's own 11-digit number you mentioned earlier. Wow, it's a lot of numbers for one person or entity.
It really is. It shows how different parts of society, government, law enforcement, international relations, they all need their own ways to track things within their specific areas.
Yeah, the PID is super specific, while the DMV one is for, well, daily life, driving, proving who you are.
It does make you think, though, having all these different IDs, does that ever get complicated for people trying to navigate everything?
That's a really good question. And then we have the tax world, the ITA.
Ah, yes, the individual taxpayer identification number, 9 digits.
For people who need to file taxes but can't get a Social Security number. And your sources were really clear, it's only for taxes.
Right. No Social Security benefits tied to it. Doesn't let you work legally, not proof of immigration status. It's purely a tax processing number.
It sits alongside the SSN and the EIN employer identification number, which are also unique IDs mentioned.
And even the PIN for your bank card. That's another identifier, focused purely on security for transactions.
So many different numbers, all serving these distinct functions: identification, record keeping, security.
Exactly. Each system exists for a reason, usually tied to specific regulations. SSN for work and benefits, ITN for taxes, PIN for security. They all manage different bits of our lives and the economy.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Your sources also dove into personal finance, taxes, home ownership stuff, general money management.
Right. If you own a home, things like property taxes and income taxes are probably, well, top of mind.
Definitely. But there are benefits too, right? The deductions.
Oh, yeah. Mortgage interest, property taxes, being able to deduct those on your federal return can be a pretty big deal. It's kind of the tax system acknowledging that investment.
And focusing on Maine, since it came up in your sources,
Yeah.
it has a progressive income tax system.
Meaning the rate goes up as income goes up. And like most places, property taxes there can really, really vary depending on where you are in the state.
Yeah, that's how local services get funded. Usually schools, roads, police. Understanding those local rates is key if you're thinking of moving somewhere.
Absolutely. It's a big chunk of the cost of living.
Your sources also hit on the basics, the foundations, budgeting, saving, investing, stuff we hear a lot about, but it really is crucial.
It really is the bedrock. Doesn't matter how much you make, really. Knowing where money goes, having a safety net, planning for the future. That's how you get some financial control, make your money work for you.
And it was interesting seeing specific resources mentioned.
Yeah.
Like for pastors, there's the Fellowship of Evangelical Churches, the NAE with its Bless Your Pastor thing.
And Brian Kluth's financial health solutions, it shows that, different jobs have unique financial challenges. Irregular income, maybe specific tax rules.
Yeah, tailored advice can be super helpful then. Also, resources for individuals with ADHD were mentioned, neurodiversity empowerment services, disability.in, Brain and Behavior Research Foundation.
Right, and suggesting financial advisors or therapists who understand ADHD, plus online communities. It recognizes that neurodiversity can impact financial management too.
Now, here's a connection I thought was really interesting. Linking finance to leadership, using Maine's motto, Dirigo.
I lead or I direct.
Yeah, the idea that managing your own money well, paying your taxes, is a form of leadership in your own life, in your community.
It's a neat way to think about it. Responsible finances aren't just personal. They contribute to the whole system through funding public services. It's like responsible participation.
We also saw show money for student visas, proving you have funds to support yourself.
Standard practice for international students, yeah.
Yeah.
Ensures a smoother transition.
And that Missouri housing voucher example, you really highlighted the income levels they look at. Extremely low income was below 30% of the area median income, or AMI.
Which, for a family of 4 in Missouri, was around $30,520 based on the source. And very low income was below 50% AMI.
There was an Iowa example, too, where 50% AMI for a family of 4 could be up to $48,000. Shows how much that AMI varies region to region.
Exactly. AMI is the key metric there. It's the midpoint income for an area, and these programs use percentages of it for eligibility, often prioritizing the lowest income groups for Section 8.
And some people on vouchers might even be able to move towards homeownership, though there are specific rules for that.
Yeah, it usually involves working full-time or being elderly or disabled, plus counseling and income limits still apply, but it offers a potential path.
Okay, let's totally switch gears. Let's talk Maine. The name itself is cool. Could be from a French province, or maybe a nautical term.
Like the Maine or mainland to distinguish it from the islands offshore. Both seem plausible, right? Connects to history and geography.
And that motto again, Dear Go, I lead. Apparently, it used to be linked to having elections in September.
Huh, that's a neat bit of history. Suggests Maine had its own political rhythm for a while. The motto itself feels very, self-reliant.
I get this statistic. Maine is ranked the #1 safest state overall.
Wow, #1. That's impressive. Low violent crime, low property crime.
Yeah, plus its cost of living is generally lower than its neighbors. That combo sounds pretty appealing.
Safety and affordability, definitely a draw. Speaks well of the communities there.
Demographically, your sources said about 51% of adults identify as Christian.
Okay, gives a sense of the cultural landscape.
And of course, the symbols. The moose, the eastern white pine. Can't picture Maine without them.
Or the nicknames. Pine Tree State, obviously, and Vacation Land. Both fit perfectly.
What really struck me, though, was the mention that even people who weren't born there but have lived there a long time feel like it's home.
That says a lot, doesn't it? Suggests a really welcoming, inclusive kind of place where people feel they belong.
Okay, quick linguistic detour now. Your source mentioned the we versus you thing and playfully said the opposite of we is you.
Huh. Just a funny reminder of how language frames us versus
And
others.
the origin of okay from, oh, correct, a deliberate misspelling.
Apparently so. Crazy how slang or even mistakes can just become normal language.
Here's a fun fact. Q, the letter Q. It doesn't appear in any U.S. state name.
No kidding. That's wild. With 50 states, you'd think Q would pop up somewhere.
Nope. And lastly, on language, there are states without standard two-letter postal abbreviations. Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, Iowa, Maine, Ohio, Texas, Utah.
Good to know. Sometimes those names are just too short or unique, I guess.
All right, shifting again. Let's get a bit philosophical. This idea of being a lifelong learner, a student of life.
Yeah, that was linked to the pale blue dot image, Carl Sagan's take on it. Seeing Earth so tiny against space.
It's humbling, right? Reminds you how much you know, but also how much you don't know.
Exactly. That's the core of lifelong learning, isn't it? Humility about what you know now and curiosity to keep exploring the unknown. It's about the journey.
Which really highlights personal growth, self-awareness, recognizing your own limits.
Absolutely. That recognition, that humility, it's what opens you up to new ideas, different views, maybe realizing you were wrong about something. That's how you learn.
And that ties into the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ah,
Yeah.
yes. The idea that people who aren't very skilled at something tend to overestimate how good they are.
Because they lack the skill to even recognize their own incompetence. It's fascinating.
It's a huge reminder to, check yourself, seek feedback, be aware of your blind spots so you can actually learn and improve.
Totally. Knowing what you don't know is often step one. And the source broadened student life beyond just school, right, to include self-discovery, relationships.
Building connections, yeah, laying a foundation. Learning happens everywhere, not just in classrooms. It's about your whole life experience.
And part of that is taking responsibility, owning your mistakes, saying sorry.
Crucial life skills. Shows maturity, self-awareness, respect for others. It's fundamental to growth.
And those guiding principles mentioned, like the golden rule variations. Do nothing to others that would hurt you. Don't offend others as you wouldn't want to be offended.
Plus empathy, feeling for others' successes and losses. It's basically a roadmap for decent human interaction. Timeless stuff.
Okay, last stretch, a few miscellaneous interesting bits that came up. The word human.
Yeah, tracing it back through French to Latin, humanus from homo, meaning man, and humus, meaning earth or ground, kind of grounds us, literally.
And Orwell's 1984 being influenced by an earlier book, Zamyatin's We, literary connections.
Then a quick math note, how I can be the Roman numeral 1, or the imaginary unit I, or the identity matrix I. Same symbol, totally different meanings depending on context.
That's how important context is. And finally, a practical warning. Watch out for WHO recruitment scams or fake prize notifications.
Definitely. Always be critical of unsolicited offers, especially online. Good reminder.
Wow. Okay, so we really covered a lot of ground there. From ID numbers deep in bureaucratic systems to personal finance strategies to the whole vibe of Maine, language oddities, and that big idea of lifelong learning.
It's amazing how looking closely at this diverse set of sources starts to build a bigger picture, doesn't it? Each piece adds a different kind of understanding. Hopefully you had some of those aha moments along the way.
Absolutely. The breadth of your interests reflected in these sources is really something. It shows how everything is kind of interconnected.
It really does.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. How does this idea of being a student of life change how you think about, say, dealing with identification systems, or managing your money, or even just how you connect with a place, whether it's Maine or somewhere else? What new questions popped into your head during our chat? Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Ever wonder what really makes someone tick? Those specific moments or thoughts that, carve out how they see everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're diving deep into the life of Carnage 1nOnly, using his own words, his own audio.
Yeah, this is pretty unique. We've got this whole collection of his personal audio clips, plus a briefing doc, even a study guide he put together. It's like getting it straight from the source.
Exactly. Loads of material, audio, written stuff, key points laid out. So our mission for you, the learner, is to basically piece all this together, to really get a handle on who Carnage 1nOnly is, his life, his thinking, what makes him create.
Think of it as a shortcut, yeah. A way to get really informed without drowning in detail. We're aiming for those aha moments.
Definitely. We want to make it clear, engaging, and honestly, just connect you with the core of his story. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. So where do we start? Maybe the very beginning, that first conscious thought he mentions.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He remembers it so clearly, age 5.
And it wasn't some big event, was it? He says he was just walking, like from one room to another, maybe the hallway, and suddenly this thought just pops in. What am I doing?
Wow. Just like that. A switch flips. Makes you wonder about that first spark of, self-awareness.
And it seems like right from the start, he felt complex inside. He mentioned feeling like he had uh, all three personalities even then. An inner flame, he called it.
That idea of being multifaceted so young,
Mm.
it kind of resonates when you look at his later thoughts on identity and art, doesn't it?
Totally. Like he was always aware of these different currents within himself.
That his childhood, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. He talks about his mom working hard because his dad wasn't around.
Right, and the impact of that absence. He describes his mother as being caught up in her own pain. Not necessarily neglectful on purpose, but her focus was elsewhere.
And the thing with his dad promising visits that didn't happen, that constant cycle of hope and then disappointment. You can imagine how that would feel for a kid.
Oh, absolutely. It highlights how a caregiver's own struggles, even unintentionally, can really leave a mark, create this sense of emptiness or longing.
So then school happens, and those feelings of being a bit different seem to grow.
Yeah.
He talks about having a lisp.
Yeah, trouble with the R sound specifically. He ended up in speech therapy for it.
And it wasn't just the speech, right? He found it hard to focus in class.
Exactly. Lots of daydreaming, feeling out of step with the other kids. He paints this picture of being more tuned into his own head than, what the teacher was saying.
Which probably wasn't easy, especially if teachers were calling him out for it.
No, definitely not. Being singled out like that, it makes sense that he'd look for another way to fit in or at least manage the attention.
Which leads to the class clown thing.
Right. He sort of leaned into it, didn't he? Found a way to get positive attention, maybe deflect from the things he felt awkward about. He even mentioned a book, Class Clown, and how people said the main character was just like him.
Taking that label and almost like alchemizing it, as he put it, turning it into a way to connect through humor.
It's a classic coping mechanism, isn't it? Using humor to navigate things. And maybe it was an early outlet for that performative side, too.
But alongside this creativity, there were some really serious mental health struggles brewing. The ADHD diagnosis and Ritalin.
Yeah, and it sounds like the medication wasn't a simple fix. He talks about the dosage going up and up, feeling over-medicated.
To the point where he couldn't sleep.
Right, leading to the Ambien prescription for insomnia caused by the Ritalin. You see this kind of cascading effect sometimes with medication.
And that Ambien. That led to a really dangerous situation. Taking his sister's pills.
Oh, incredibly dangerous. The hallucinations he describes, stabbing a skeleton decoration, seeing monkeys with toys, his grandfather turning into King Louie from the Jungle Book.
It sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
Just utterly disorienting.
Absolutely. And he acknowledges how badly it could have ended. That night led to him being hospitalized in a mental health facility.
Which you'd think would be awful. But he describes finding something unexpected there. A sense of belonging.
It's surprising, isn't it? But it speaks volumes about how isolated he must have felt before. Suddenly, he's around other kids with their own special tics, as he says, and he finds acceptance.
And even a sense of purpose in helping them.
Exactly. It reveals this deep empathy he had even then amidst his own turmoil.
That empathy, that way of looking at people, it seems really connected to his grandfather's influence. He shares some powerful advice.
Oh, definitely. That advice about judging people purely by their actions, not their skin color, not their clothes, none of that superficial stuff. That's a core principle for him.
And you hear that echo throughout his reflections, right? Judge by actions.
It really becomes his touchstone. He admits he had his own biases to overcome, things he learned growing up, but he stresses learning from experience, giving people the benefit of the doubt until their actions show you who they are.
It seems like a very deliberate, conscious philosophy he tries to live by.
I think so. And it ties into his ideas about language, too, the power of words, even manifestation.
Right, he mentions feeling like certain videos he found online were almost divinely guided. What exactly does manifestation mean to him here?
It seems to be this belief that intense focus, your words, your intentions can actually influence reality, like drawing things to you. He felt those specific videos weren't just random clicks. They were answers or guidance showing up precisely when needed.
So words as tools, almost like spells, as he puts it, having real weight.
Oh, yeah, a very strong belief in the power of intention and language to shape his path. And that path is deeply intertwined with his creative work. Music, obviously, is massive for him.
Absolutely. He sees it as a way to say things that are hard to put into normal words, right?
Yeah.
To process everything.
Precisely. Communicating the incommunicable, connecting with people on that deeper emotional level. Even his darkest freestyles, he finds kernels of truth or insight in them later.
And it's not just music. He wrote a book, Strokes of Hope.
Hmm. And that title connects to this idea he has about mistakes, that they aren't just errors, they're like brushstrokes, necessary parts of the whole picture.
That's a really powerful metaphor. Reframing struggles as part of the process, part of the art, part of life.
It speaks to resilience, doesn't it? Trusting that inner guidance, even through the messy parts, and wanting to use his creations to help others, leave something positive behind.
Okay, shifting gears a bit to his personal life. He tells the story of meeting Amanda. That happened while he was working at KFC.
Yeah, quite the meet cute, apparently. He saw her eyes first and told a coworker they were eyes of an angel before they'd even properly met.
Wow, talk about immediate connection. And things moved fast.
Very fast. He says she moved in pretty quickly after they got together, and then, not long after his 21st birthday, they found out she was pregnant. Unexpectedly.
And he hints that the co-parenting situation now, it's maybe not easy.
He does. It doesn't go into detail, but you get the sense there's some sadness or frustration there currently.
But he also talks about his daughter with so much love.
Oh, absolutely. Calls her the best, most beautiful soul. Clearly, she's incredibly important to him, despite any difficulties in the co-parenting dynamic.
Now, one of the most sort of mystical parts of his reflections is this whole thing with numbers 3, 2, 1.
Yes. That's a fascinating bit. Finding these numbers written on pieces of paper along with his album titles.
Right when he was thinking about a trilogy and his song I, Me happens to play.
Exactly. For him, it wasn't coincidence. It felt like a clear sign, like confirmation from, well, somewhere, that he should release those 3 albums.
And then he goes into the symbolism of the letter I, connecting it to L for all in Latin, and the number 1.
Yeah, linking it all to his concept of one and all. It shows a mind that's always looking for patterns, for deeper meaning, for connections between things.
This one and all idea, it sounds like it represents this feeling of interconnectedness for him, the individual being part of the collective all.
I think that's exactly it. It's part of his journey to understand himself within the larger world, finding unity in language, numbers, experience.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. As we look back over everything, the audio, the notes, what are the big recurring themes that stand out from this deep dive?
Well, definitely the huge impact of his early life, his childhood experiences, both the good and the bad, clearly shaping who he is.
Right, that seems fundamental.
Then there's this constant search for meaning, especially in difficult times, trying to make sense of suffering, find purpose in it.
And the power of words we talked about.
Yes, language as a creative force, a healing tool, a way to manifest things, that's central. Also, that commitment to tolerance. Judging by actions, the lesson from his grandfather.
That comes up again and again.
It really does. And overall, you just see this ongoing journey, self-discovery, resilience, trying to heal and understand himself better.
It's clear he's someone who's faced a lot, but keeps trying to process it, find meaning, and maybe share that through his art.
Absolutely. He's very open about the struggles, the doubts, but also these moments of real insight. It paints a picture of a really complex, genuine person trying to figure things out.
So for you, the learner, hopefully this deep dive has given you that efficient path to understanding Carnage 1nOnly. We've touched on his first memories, school, mental health, philosophy, creativity, relationships, even those intriguing numbers.
Yeah, weaving together how his past informs his present, how he seeks meaning, how he uses art. It's a compelling look at resilience and that lifelong quest for self-understanding.
And maybe it leaves us with something to think about ourselves. Here's a final thought. How have your own experiences, the highs and the lows, shaped how you see the world right now? And are there any small details, any seeming coincidences in your own life that might hold a deeper meaning if you look closer? Something to mull over, perhaps.